Hi guys, welcome to our first session for week 2. I hope everybody is doing okay today. I'll just apologize beforehand. I come down with what I think is a little bit of a cold. I have a really dry throat today, so there might be some intermediate coughing. I'm trying to drink a lot to keep that from happening, but it happens. So I apologize beforehand for any coughing. The best way to contact me, just a reminder, is email and then text message. And then, of course, the Canvas chat. I check it daily. Just remember that anything you put there, everyone can see. And you can also call me at 817-909-5597. Today's agenda, our next lecture is tomorrow at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. Today's topics. Today we're going to reflect a little bit about what we learned last week. And we're going to talk about manipulating data the right way, which was our theme for this lecture. We're going to talk about creating new tables, using the describe statement, adding data to new tables, deleting a table from a database, how you see all the content of a table. We're going to talk about selecting specific columns, filtering records, using the not statement, using the greater than to filter. We're going to talk about using the between clause, the in operator, the order by keyword, and the group by keyword, the like operator, and we're going to talk about how to compute columns, how to do some math between columns. And we're going to talk about the min and max function, the in operator, and the sum function. So let's talk about remembering what you learned. What does SQL stand for? Yep, that's it. Structured query language. What comes after the select keyword in the select statement? What do you put after that select? The column name, yes. What comes after the from keyword? Absolutely, that's where you list the table. That select statement and how to set it up and structure it is the most important thing you need to know in SQL. And that's why we keep going over it. So what if you need to filter your data based on conditions? What clause do you use? You guys had to filter a lot of data last week. What clause were you using after that from line? When you said from this table, you did, yes, where followed by condition, where this column value is greater than 16, or this column equals MA. If you need to filter your data based on multiple conditions, what operator do you use? So maybe you need to pick all the groups that are larger than 16 and have a trip type of hiking. So what do you use to set those two conditions? Yeah, the and clause between them. So now let's talk about data manipulation the right way. We are going to go through the things you are going to need to complete your assignment this week. We're going to talk about creating a new table. The create table statement is used to create new tables in a database. Simply create table, and then whatever the table name is going to be, and then in parentheses you list the columns and what that column attribute is. For example, create tables person. you want to have a column named person ID, which is a number, so you give it that INT, and it's also the primary key. And then you're going to have a column called last name, and it's going to be characters or mixtures of character, symbols, numbers. And it's going to be, the length of it can be 255. And then you've got your first name column, which is the same thing. The length can be 255. And then you have your address, which is going to be made up of numbers and letters. And the length of it can be 255. And then you've got your city, which the length of it can also be 255. Now then, your assignment tells you that you have to create a table named Adventure Trip. So you're going to use that create statement. Create table, and you're going to do your table name, and according to number 1 of your worksheet, it says it needs to be Adventure Trip. And then it needs multiple columns. Let's see, you've got to have a trip ID. And it's supposed to be a decimal. And the length is 3 and 0 places. So that's done like that, 3 and 0. And it is your primary key. So there's my first column. And the second column is trip name. And it shows the type to be a character and the length to be 75. And then the next column is the start location. And it's a character. And it can have 50 characters. And then you have to have your state, distance, max group, type, and season. You're going to follow this format until you get to your last column. And in your direction, it tells you, it gives you a list. It says trip ID, trip name, start location, state, distance, max group size, type, and season. And it tells you what type each one needs to be, what the length needs to be on each one. If it's a decimal, it tells you how many decimal places. Remember, in decimal, the length comes first, and then a comma, followed by the decimal places. And then once you finished all your columns, don't forget to close it out with that parenthesis and a semicolon. And then you're going to create the table. And down here it shows me that it was created. Now, same thing we were having trouble with last week. My SQL is not updating the way it should be. Let's see if I can force it to refresh. There we go. And so now I have my new table. And then it tells you that it wants you to, after you create the table, it tells you that it wants you to show all the information about that table, which means it wants you to display a list that shows the column name, the type, the length, all of that. That is done using the describe statement. The describe statement is used to display the columns and attributes of a table. And it's very simple. Describe table name. So in SQL, erase your code there and do describe. And table name is Adventure Trip, semicolon. And there's the table I created. It shows me that I did a column for trip ID with a decimal. I did a trip name with characters and a start location column that's also set to characters. And it shows me which one is primary key. Now, once you've done that, you can open up your snipping tool. Your directions tell you, please insert your SQL statement here, and then a picture of your output underneath that. What you guys can do is simply insert one picture. New. And just take a picture of your whole screen right there. And do that one picture. That way it shows your code and it shows your output on the bottom. And then as we move through the assignment, you get to number 2. And in number 2, it tells you that it wants you to add some rows. Well, I didn't add all of my rows to this table, so I'm going to have to go in real quick here. And we're going to have to add my rows so that my data goes in correctly. I don't want to change this to INNODB. And let's make a new column. I need a column for state. And it's supposed to be character. And the size of it is supposed to be 2. And then I have distance, which is a decimal. And the size is, the length is 4, and the decimal place is a 0. And then I have one that is max group size. And it's a decimal as well. And it has 4, 0. And then I have my type, which is a character, and it's 20 characters long. And my season is 20 characters long. That one doesn't exist. Delete selected. There we go. And I'm going to hit apply. Apply. And finish. Now I'm going to refresh my table again. Go ahead and close this tabs out. Go back to my SQL. So number 2 says, okay, now you're going to insert data. You're going to insert the actual columns and everything you see there. If I do my described statement now, we see all my columns. So in order to insert data, it's a pretty simple statement too. You can insert into, that's what you're going to use. You're going to use the insert into statement to add new data records to the table. You can do it one of 2 ways. If you only want to insert data in specific columns, meaning not the entire row, you're only going to insert data in some specific columns, you would do something like insert into the table name, and then you would list the columns you want to put that data into, and then you would say values, and then you would list your values that matched the order in which you listed your columns. If you're going to fill the whole row, meaning you're going to put data in every single column in that row, then you can do it simpler. You can just do insert into table and then the values. And you're going to list those values in the order in which the columns are in the table. So we're going to go back to our SQL and we're going to say insert into adventure trip values. And we're going to insert our values. And don't forget, they have to be in parentheses. And our directions say that we are inserting the trip ID is 45. So we can go 45, comma. And the trip name, which is the next column, is JP. Don't forget that it has to be in parentheses because it's characters. And it's also case sensitive. So you never want to do that in all caps because most people wouldn't type it all caps. They would do the first letter cap of the first word and the first letter cap of the second word if there's two. And then followed by a comma. And then it says the start location, which is our next column, is J. Again, don't forget your quotations. Followed by a comma. And the state, which requires quotations as well, is BT. And then the distance is 8. And the maximum group size is also 8. And the type is hiking. And the season, it says, is summer. And followed by your parentheses and then a semicolon. And I'm going to execute that SQL, and it says right there, insert into Adventure Tables trip. One row affected. Everything worked just fine. So it tells you to place your SQL statement here. So you're going to need to take an image of that and then screen capture the window that shows the results are running, which means you need to do a select. So what you can do is simply hit your enter key twice and then do select asterisk from Adventure Trip and put your cursor back in front of select, and you're going to hit the second lightning bolt. That executes the statement under the keyboard cursor. And this gives me my results. So then you could take a screenshot of all of that, and it shows all of your code and the results all at one time. So you just have to place one picture instead of multiple pictures. And then number 3 tells you that it wants you to delete the adventure table. Any idea? Anybody have a guess on how you delete a table? We're just simply going to drop it like a hot potato. We're simply going to say drop table and the table name, and it's gone. It just disappears. So I'm going to erase all of that and simply do drop adventure trip. Oops, I forgot my table. Drop table adventure trip. And it's gone. So when you take a screenshot of that, do it all the way across. So this is not in your list anymore. It's done. It's gone. Pretty easy to drop a table. And number 4 on your worksheet says accomplish a screen capture of the description of each of the 5 Colonia Adventure tables. You're going to be using the describe statement there. So you're going to have to do a describe on every single table. So there's your table list. Just describe the table name, customer, execute it, take a screenshot of the big square in the center, There's the first one. And then just simply change the table name. And this time we want to do guide. Execute it again. Take a new picture. There's the next one. And just keep going down your table list until you get them all. And that's number 4. Number 5 is all about a screen capture as well, except for this time you want to show the first 10 rows of data in each table. So how do we select data in a table? How do we make SQL show us what's inside a table? What statement do we use? Yes, the select table. That's absolutely right. We are going to use the nice generic select asterisk from table name because it shows us all the columns and all the rows. So you take your first one, select asterisk from customer, and run it, and there's all the data. So just take a screenshot of the middle section there and paste it in what's marked A on the worksheet. That's your customer table. Then it tells you to do the same thing to the reservation table. Oh, just go change your name, reservation, rerun it, take a new picture. And then it tells you to do your trip table, and you just keep repeating this until you get all the tables and get all your pictures done. That's number 5, and that is the end of the first worksheet. This week you have 2 different worksheets, one for chapter 3, one for chapter 4. The first worksheet is pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to be doing a little bit of code and a lot of picture taking. Chapter 4 is where you're going to learn some new SQL. And your first part, number 1, tells you that you need to list the guide number, last name, first name, and hire date for each guide. So we know that we're going to have to specify what columns we want, right? But it's still your basic select statement. You're going to simply select and choose the column names that you want. So let's see, we need the guide number, and we need the last name, and we need the first name, and the hire date of each guide. So we know we're selecting from the guide table. So if we run that, we get a list of all of our guides, their last names, their first names, and the date they were hired. Just take a picture of the middle of your screen so it shows your code and your output, and paste it in there. Then it tells you, list the trip name of each trip that has the type biking. So we are going to be using what table? We need to list the trip name of each trip that has the type of biking. What table are we going to use? The customer table, the guide table, the reservation table, the trip table, or the trip guide table? Which one of those tables should have the information we need? If you're unsure, the worksheet at the very top of it has the ERD for you. So you can look back up and say, okay, I need the trip name. So you look at the columns and find where it lists the trip name. There it is. There's the trip name, and it's only in one table, and it came from the trip table. So I know that I'm going to be pulling this information from the trip table. So it tells me to list the trip name. So I'm going to say select trip name, and from the trip table, and it gives me a list of all the trip names. But I need it to say, I only want to see the ones that have biking as the type. So what do we have to add to filter our data? The handy little where clause, right? Because we want to select the trip name where the type, which is actually trip type, equals biking. Now if I execute that, I get a shorter list. And it shows me only the trip names that are biking trips. And then we have to list the name and state of guides that live in Massachusetts. So let's see, we need to list the last name and state of each guide that lives in Massachusetts. Well, that's a where clause too, right? We're going to ask it to pull the last name from the guide table where the state equals Massachusetts. That's just a simple matter of changing our script here. So this time we need to select last name. So that's what it's telling us to list, is the last name. And it's the last name of the guide. So we know we can find that in the guide table. And we want to pull all of them that live in Massachusetts. Well, that's the state. And the abbreviation is MA. So we simply make those changes, and there they are. There's 3 of them. Number 4 gets a little more complicated. It says, now I want you to list the name and state of each guide that does not live in Massachusetts. Does not live there. So we're going to be using that not operator. We talked about the not operator last week, but we didn't actually use it. And it's simply adding the word not after where and adding the condition. So in our case, we're going to be going back to the code we used, and we're going to say, okay, this time they want the last name and the state. So we have to add state up there. Still from the guide table. And that does not live in Massachusetts. So we're going to add the word not right after where. Where not state equals MA. And then run it, and we see here all the guides that do not live in Massachusetts. And then it tells you to list the trip name and distance of each trip that has the type hiking and that has a distance longer than 10 miles. So what does our SQL look like? It gives you a little hint on this question that says, check out sections using compound conditions in your textbook, in your ebook. But let's think this too. We have to have a select clause, right? It tells us to list the trip name and distance. So which columns are we going to be showing? We're going to show that trip name, right? And it tells us to list the trip name and distance. So we're going to be showing the distance column of each trip. So we know that it's going to be the trip table that has the type hiking. So we're going to rephrase this where clause here. Where trip underscore type equals hiking and that has a distance longer than 10 miles. So we're going to add that and keyword right there. And distance, oops, and distance equals, oops, let's see, distance is longer than 10 miles. So greater than 10. And we get a list. There's one, the Crawford Path. It's hiking and it's longer than 10 miles. So just going to take a picture of that center screen showing your code and your display again and put it in your worksheet. Now we get some more practice with that where clause. You are interested in a biking trip in the early fall for more than 10 individuals. You want to list all the columns for trips that meet your requirements. So let's think this out. You are interested in a biking trip. What table are we going to be using? Well, since we're looking at trips, we're going to be using that trip table. And it doesn't tell us what columns specifically. We probably want, if we're doing research, we're going to want to look at all the columns, right? So when we look at all the columns, we can just use an asterisk, right? Because it'll pull the entire row for all the data that meets our criteria. So we're going to select it all from the trip table. And the trip must be in early fall. So we're going to do trip type. Well, our trip type is biking, and we're going to change the distance to, let's see, you are interested in hiking, a biking trip in the early fall for more than 10 individuals. So we're going to do trip type should be biking. Oops. Biking. Don't forget that's case sensitive. And the season should be equal to early fall. And the maximum group size, if we come over to our trip table, we look at our columns, you can see right there, maximum group size. So I'm going to say and max underscore GRP underscore size is greater than 10. If I run that, there it is. I get two results. There are two trips that are biking trips and that have a group size for more than 10 people. Take these queries by pieces. Guys, don't try to think about them all as one. Go in pieces. Do the select clause first. Select. Okay, it tells me it needs me to list what? If it doesn't give you specific column names, then use the generic asterisk and list it all. Okay, I'm listing all of it. And from where? So you read it and you say, okay, this is about a biking trip. Well, the biking trips are all listed in the trip table. So I know I'm selecting data from the trip table. So from trip. Now you put together your conditions. Okay, so you want to look at the ones that are biking trips. So you know you need a where trip type equals biking. And you also want to look at the ones that are early fall. So you know you need to add that and statement. And season equals early fall. And it also says for a group larger than 10. So you need another and clause. It says max group size, greater than 10. And it pulls 2 trips. And just take a picture of it and paste your snapshot into the worksheet. Now, number 7 is where you're going to do some new SQL. Number 7 says, list the reservation ID and trip price. So let's start at the beginning. What columns are we using? Well, it tells us to list the reservation ID and trip price. So we know we're listing the reservation ID and the trip price. Trip underscore price. And what table? Well, if we read all of this, it mentions reservations twice. The reservation ID we know is the primary key to the reservation table, right? You know that. So we automatically know this is coming from the reservation table. I'm going to do reservation. And then it says, after you've listed the reservation ID, the trip price for those reservations that have a trip price that is greater than or equal to 40, but less than or equal to 60. Well, instead of writing a complicated where clause, you can use the between clause. The between operator selects values within a given range. The values can be numbers, text, or dates. And the syntax is this. You select your column names from whatever table, and then you say where, the column name, between, in your 2 conditions. So in this case, you erase all of that in there. We would say where, let's see, we want the trip prices that are greater than 40, greater than or equal to 40, but less than or equal to 60. So we're going to say where trip price between 40 and 60. Let's see what we get. There they are. There's 6. Those are all the trips that are between $40 and $60. And that's what we were looking for. Don't overthink these questions. Take them line by line. It will help you understand what's being asked. Do the select part first. Read the question and say, okay, it's telling me that it says list something, then those are your columns. It says list the trip name or list the customer name, first name. Those are your columns. So after select, you're going to write what it tells you to list. Okay, well, it says list reservation ID. Well, I know the column name. If you're not sure of your column names, find the table that you're working on in this case it was the reservations table, and open that reservations table by clicking on the little arrow, and it'll show you all your columns so that you can see how you need to write them in your SQL code. Well, reservation ID has an underscore. Trip price has an underscore between trip and price. And then move on to from, well, you know that's your reservation table. And then move on to your actual filtering. Okay, it's telling me that I need to get the data that meets this criteria, that's greater than or equal to 40 or less than or equal to 60, or that lives in Massachusetts, or is a biking trip. Well, that's how you set up your where clause. The where clause is the specifics, the conditions it's giving you in the question. So question 8 says, list the customer number, customer last name, customer first name, city and state of each customer that lives in New Jersey, New York, or Pennsylvania. Use the in operator in your SQL. Either in operator. Well, the in operator is pretty cool because it will allow you to list criteria in parentheses just divided by a comma. It allows you to specify multiple values of something in the where clause. So you just kind of add it. It's kind of a shorthand instead of having to say where column equals NJ and where column equals NY, and except for you would be using or there because no column lists both states. So you would have to say where state equals NJ or state equals NY or state equals PA. And so it's a lot of code. Well, there's a shorthand for it, and you use the simple in command. So we would erase this, and we would say where the column name. So in this case, it's going to be, let's go back up and do our select first. So we've got our select. It tells us to list the customer ID, the customer number. So customer underscore number. Well, when I see that, it automatically tells me that we're going to the customer table because the customer number is a primary key. Anything that has ID or number in it is always going to be a primary key. So I know I'm going to the customer table. So I can open that customer table so I can see all the column names. And I know that customer number, it's just NUM instead of spelling the whole word out. So it tells me to list the customer number, the customer last name, the customer's first name, and city and the state. So city, comma, state. From, and I know this is the customer table. And where state, instead of between, I want to say in. And then I'm going to add some parentheses, erase all of this. And I want to say NJ, NY, and PA. So I list all my criteria right there. And I run it. Uh-oh. We have an error. Unknown column. NJ, where clause. What did we forget? Where state and NJ. Yep, that's what she says. But what is wrong with that statement? What am I missing? NJ, NY, and PA are what? They're characters, right? They have to have quotations around each one of them. Now we run it again. And ta-da! There are all of our customers that live in one of those states. And then it tells you, it wants you to repeat, use the same code that you just used. But this time it wants you to sort the records in ascending order, and then by customer last name in descending order. Well, if we look at this, I'm not in any kind of records by state in ascending order. My state is definitely not in order, right? Well, the default filtering is ascending, so I can simply use the nice order by clause. And if I want to make sure I'm ascending, I can use that ACS at the end, or the DES for descending. In this case, I want to go ascending. And so I'm going to say order by state and ASC. And there it is. My states have been ordered. They're in ascending order. So you take a screenshot and paste it in that place. And then it tells you to also sort the customer by last name in descending order. So I would want to order by last name, and this time in descending order. PCS. And run it. And there's my last name, alphabetical order. DSC. Oops. Yep, that's right. DSC. And so there's my last name in descending order. If I wanted to get my last name in ascending order, I could just run the default. And it puts it in ascending order because that's the default. Make sense? Sorting is pretty easy. And you just remember, if it says ascending, you don't have to put anything after it. All you have to do is say order by and give the column name. And then it'll put it in the correct order. It goes state, and it'll put it in alphabetical order. But if it needs to be in descending order, then you have to actually specify that with a DESC at the end. And then it will put everything in descending order. Number 10 on the worksheet says, how many trips are in the state of Massachusetts? You guys learned how to do that last week. What function do you use to get the total number of rows? The count function, right? So you say select count, and we are counting how many trips are in the state of Massachusetts. So you could count states. So we're going to say count states. Oops, that has to be in parentheses. No space. Count state from trips where state equals MA semicolon. So I only wanted to count the trips that are in Massachusetts. I'll run it. What happened? Uh-oh. Colonial Adventure Trips does not, I put an S on my trips. And my actual trip is actual trip, no S. So I've got a syntax error right there. And we get 4 trips in Massachusetts. That's good. That's your answer. Take a picture of the whole screen in the center there and paste it. Now the next one is new SQL. How many trips originated in each state? Well, you could write a really long SQL that said, select count, states, from trip, where state equals MA, or state equals this, or state equals that, and you'd have to know all the states in the database. Well, that's not what you want to do. You want something simple, right? So we can use the group by. So we're going to say, okay, we want to group the columns by what? Well, in this case, we want to group them by state. But we also want to count each one of those. So in your SQL statement, it's actually pretty simple. You're going to say select count state from trip and sorry guys. We're going to take out the where. And we're going to say group by state. And I don't think that has to be in parentheses. No parentheses there. Just the group by and run it. And look what we get. Except for we didn't list our state. You see where it said we told it to count state, but we also wanted to list the state. So I'm going to pull state twice. And then it lists our state. This is our count and then our state. Now you could get that to output a little better by simply taking and listing, say select state, and then comma count state. And then run it. And it listed it in the proper order. And 2, 4, 12, 19, 4. Those are all of the states that have trips. And how many states are in each one, how many trips are in each one of those states is basically what we've just counted. So then we move to number 12. Number 12 says, find the name of each group containing the word pond. Now, in week 1, you had to use this, but we're going to learn a new little trick using that like operator. There is a simple way. Last week, I showed you guys how to do it where you come up with every variation in which that word could fall. But if you want to just search, and it doesn't matter where the word falls, it can fall anywhere. You just want it to pull everything that has that word. And if the difference is you simply don't put a space between your percent signs. You keep them together. So we would say, let's see, our statement says to find the name of each trip containing the word pond. So we know we want to look at the trip name. So we can say trip name from trip where trip name like quotation parentheses pond. Remember, this is case sensitive. Pond parentheses quotation percent sign quotation parentheses. There we go. And our semicolon. And we run that. It says there's several. We've got the black pond, the Shervy pond, the long pond tour, lower pond tour, and Pondicherry something. We have this weird name here, which is some sort of trail ride, but you see it has the word pond in it. And so it pulls all of those for us. And that's the simple generic way to do it. If you just need to search a string of words, I mean, you have a column that has more than one word in it. And you need to find all of the information that contains this one word somewhere within that string of words. You can do something using your percent sign. And you just do percent, that word percent, and no matter where it falls in the description of that string, whether it's the first word, the second word, the third word, the fifth word, depending on the string, it will pull it and show it to you. Number 13 is where things start getting a little more difficult, because this is where you're going to do your computing. You can perform computations using SQL queries. A computed column does not exist in the database, but can be computed using data in the existing columns. You can do things like add, subtract, multiply, divide. And the way you do that is like this example. Select whatever columns you need to select. And then in parentheses, you tell it where you want to do what you want it to do, what mathematical function you want to do. Now, our question says that we need to calculate the total price of a trip by adding the trip price plus other fees and multiplying the results by the number of persons included in the reservation. And we need to list the reservation ID, trip ID, customer number, number of persons, and total price for all reservations from the number of persons is greater than, where the number of persons is greater than 4. You use the column name total price for the calculated field. That's where this little as comes in. But I'm saying you're going to do this mathematical problem and you're going to list it as total price from the reservations where the number is greater than 4. So let's plan this out. Okay, I'm going to disregard all the information in this question and just find a specific spot where I see that keyword that says list, because I know that's my columns. So I'm going to do select, and it tells me to list the reservation ID. So reservation underscore ID and the trip ID, so trip underscore ID, the customer number, so customer underscore number, and the number of persons. So number of persons. Now this is all going to come from our reservation table. So I want to look at my columns. And there it is, number of persons. So it's NUM underscore persons. So from my reservation table, where where do I have a max group size, or do I have a number of persons? So where num persons what is greater than 4? So greater than 4. Okay, so there's my basic statement. So now I need to go back in and do my calculations. So I know the calculations are done on the select. So I'm going to go to the end of that select sentence and do comma. And it says that I need to calculate the total price of the trip by adding the trip price plus other fees. And then it tells me I have to multiply. Well, that means I need to add something first and then multiply it. So in parentheses, I'm going to say trip underscore price plus other fees. So I have a column that's called other fees, in parentheses, times, I need to multiply that by the result of the number of persons included in the reservation. So times num underscore persons. And then I need to list that in a new column as, and it tells me that new column should be named included in the reservation. Use the column name total underscore price. So I've got my mathematical equation, if you will, written right there. And I've told it that I want you to output that in a total price column. So let's run it and see what we get. Ta-da! And there it is. We know that trip ID 39 is going to cost a total of $275. And it's going to cost, trip ID 22 is going to cost $680. And you could make this more complicated. I could say, comma, I want to also know how much it's going to cost per person. Well, that's a pretty easy one, right? You've got total price, and per person price would simply be trip underscore price plus, plus other underscore fees as per person. Now run it. And that gives me two additional columns. It tells me the total price, and the price per person is $55. Let's check our math. Is 55 times 5 275? Anybody got a calculator handy? Or can do that in their head? 55 times 5. Yeah, that's correct. It is 275. So that is question 13. And this is the hardest question you will have on the worksheet. It's question 13. Your next question says, list the guide names, first name, and hire date for all guides that were hired before June 10th. Order your results by hire date. You're going to be using your where clause there, right? It's a simple where clause. Don't forget how your date is formatted. So we know that it says list guide names, first name, and hire date. So you can do your select. Select, what columns are we selecting? Well, anything where it says list. Right now it says list guide's last name. So last name and first name and hire date. So hire underscore date. And we know we're going to get that information from the guide table, because that's what we're talking about, are the guides. And then it tells you that we're hired before June 10th, 2013. But you need to know what the date format looks like, because here's a hint, guys. The hint it gives you says your where clause will contain 6/10/2013. That is not the correct date format. You need to be sure you remember what the date format is. If you don't, run your query like this first. Select last name, first name, hire date from guide. Run it. This is our format. So then we know we need to say where. Let's see, before June 10th, 2013. So less than 2013 dash the month is June, so 06 dash 10. So we know where higher underscore date is less than 2013 06 10. Run it. Uh-oh, what happened? It's empty. Why is that? Because this is not a number. It contains symbols, therefore it has to be in quotations. So we run it again, and there you have it. You've got 5 guides that were hired before June 10th of 2013. And then your number 15. What is the minimum distance and maximum distance for each type of trip? Well, each type of trip, that's the key word for using a group, right? Because you need to know the minimum distance and maximum distance. Well, that gets you into some new SQL, your min-max function. The min function returns the smallest value of the selected column, and the maximum function returns the largest value. And it's a real simple setup. Select min, and then in column in parentheses as whatever column you want that to be. If you want it as a column, if you don't put that as statement on there, it's going to produce a column called min price. And then from products, where you want it to select from. So let's go back up here and read you our select. So we know, let's see, it tells us display the, oops, no. What is the minimum distance and maximum distance for each type of trip? For each type of trip. So I know I'm going to want to list trip type. And I want to, comma, min distance. Oops, that needs to be in quotations. And distance. Comma, and I also need the max distance. So I'm going to do max. Oops, oops, oops. That does not need to be in quotations. Min distance, and those are column names, and max distance, like that. And I know that's going to need to come from the trip table. And it tells me that it wants to know for each type of trip. So I need to group it. Because if I run it just like this, it's going to give me hiking. That's it. That's all it's going to give me is hiking. It's going to pull the first row and give me that information. So I want to group it. So I'm going to go group by trip, oops, trip type. So now if I run it, ta-da, we get them all. Biking, the minimum distance from biking is 8 miles. Maximum distance is 27. Hiking is 4 miles with a maximum of 16. Paddling is 8 miles and a maximum of 15 miles. So now we have all the information we want. So our next question is another new to you, but we did talk about it last week. We talked about the distinct operator last week. That's where you want to pull something that's very specific and only contains that information. 16 says, display the different seasons in which trips are offered. List each season only once. So if I said select, we know we want this to be seasons from the trip table, if I did it just like this, and I run it, oops, I have an S on seasons. And then again, it lists everything. And you can see they're duplicated, right? You see a lot of summer, a lot of early fall. You've got lots of duplicates. But if I put the word distinct in front of season, so I say select distinct season from trip, run it again, and it will show me only one listing for each season. Summer, late spring, early fall, spring, late fall, and early spring. That's what the distinct does. It will list only each item one time. So if you have a column that has multiple things in it and it's repeated over and over and over, and you only want to see what each one of those options are or what each type is, you use the distinct. It will only pull one of each type. There will be no repeats. Number 17 says, list the trip IDs for paddling trips. Well, that's not very hard, is it? You guys know how to do that. List the trip IDs for paddling trips. So you're going to do a simple select trip ID from the trip where type equals paddling. And it will give you your list. 18, on the other hand, says list the reservation IDs. For reservations that are for paddling trips, you must use a sub-query. List the reservation IDs for reservations that are from a paddling trip. Well, that's interesting. We are definitely going to have to use that sub-query. This one's a little more difficult. You are going to be using your in operator. That in operator allows you to add a second query, like a nested query, to help pull information from two different tables. So let's take the first part of our query first. It tells us to list the reservation ID from, and it actually says for. Well, I'm transferring that to from the reservation. So I'm going to do reservation where, so where trip type equals, trip type equals paddling, but trip type isn't in the reservations, is it? So how do I do that? Well, you set it up like this. I want to say where trip ID. I want to say where trip underscore ID, and then I'm going to add some parentheses. Select do I want to use trip type here? I can say select trip ID from trip where trip type equals paddling. Add my parentheses, add my semicolon. And I run it, and it gives me a short list that says this reservation has a trip type of paddling. This reservation has a trip type of paddling. This is how you combine information from two tables, two separate tables that are joined in some sort of relationship. And we know that since the reservation table contains the trip ID, which we know is the primary key of the trip table, and a foreign key of the reservation table, we know that this table has a relationship. They have a relationship between each other. So we can pull information using both tables. So we can combine them. Now, last week you did a few queries where this would have come in very handy, but I showed you the long form, where I had you look up the ID for something first and then use that ID in your where clause so that you could pull the information out. This is the shorter method where you could do a nested selection statement so that you can combine information and sort information based on what's in both tables. And number 19 says, what is the total number of persons for all reservations? Well, guys, when you want to get a total number, you can't use the count because that counts rows, right? You want this to add how many people have booked reservations. So you're going to use what's called the sum function. It's just like the count function. It's set up the same way. Select sum, the column name from table, and you can add a where clause if you need that where clause. In this case, we don't need the where clause. It's very simple. Select sum for total number of persons for all reservations. So we need to select sum, quotation, and it's going to be num underscore persons from reservation. And we run it, and there it tells us 77 people have a reservation because it's counting every single person listed in the number of persons column. Number 20 is the last one, and it says on this list, on this last question, you will be writing your own question and generating the SQL method to answer the question. In addition to the typical select clause and from clause, you must also include a where clause with an and clause. Have fun with it. And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's really not that hard, guys. First thing you're going to do is come over to your table list, pick a column, pick a table. First thing you do is pick a table, not the trip guide table. Pick one of your main tables, customer guides, reservation, trip. I'm going to use guide. And open your columns. Well, there it gives you all your columns. Now, guys, you cannot use this question. So just FYI, don't copy my question. You'll get it wrong. You have to come up with your own question, but it's really easy. You're going to start with your select. So let's say you want your question to be, I usually come up with my query first. It's usually the easiest way. So let's come up with our query first. So you're going to say select, pick a column. I'm going to say select guide number. Guide number from guide where last name, last name like, and in parentheses, I'm going to do A and a percent sign. Basically, I'm saying anything that starts with an A. Anybody's last name starts with an A. And this one's going to be a hard one because I don't know what my last names are. Maybe I should rethink this because we have to have that and clause. Well, we could try and hire date equals I'm going to do hire date like 2013 percent. Oops, back. And I forgot to put my A in quotes. Like that. See what we get.
Sure, James.
I didn't get anything. So let's see if there's any last names that start with an A. Let me erase that part and I get an A. Yep, I've got a GAD number. I have 1. Well, we've got a problem. Let's see when his hire date was. So I'm going to say hire date. Hire underscore date. Underscore date. 2012. So I'm going to say and hire underscore date like 2012. Oops. And there we go. So there is my query. So now I would write my question. List all guide numbers and hire dates for anyone whose last name starts with an A and was hired in 2012. There would be my question. There it is. We'll cut that. Whose last name starts with an A and was hired in 2012? There's my question. Pretty easy question. And if you want to do it like this, instead of having to type in the worksheet, after you've run your query, type your question at the top of it, put a line space, and then take a picture of the whole thing, and you can just paste the whole thing in there. Otherwise, you don't want to leave this question on there because you see you're getting an error. Because, of course, we typed a bunch of words that SQL Workbench is going, huh? That still makes sense to me. That is your last question, though. And it's easiest if you start by choosing your column, choosing your table. Choose what table you're going to do. Open up your columns tab in that table so you have the list. And then say, okay, I want to select these columns from this table and where the city is New Jersey, or the city is Pennsylvania or New York, or the city is, and you may have to look for some of that information. So what you could do is simply do your generic select for that table from, and I use guides. Do your generic select statement so you can see all your information. It will help you come up with your question. So you can say, okay, I want to select everyone's first name that lives in Joffrey and has a hire date of, let's see, there's 2012, that's 2013. So it has a hire date of 2012. And do they have anything else in common? Has a postal code of 03452. That's going to pull them up. I don't care what your question is. I just want you to make that custom query. So have fun with it. Be creative with it. Pull up your columns just like I did. Do your columns over there on the right, list them, and do a generic select statement so you can see all the information in it. So you can make sure what you're putting in is actually going to pull some results up for you. Don't forget, anything that's just numbers doesn't have to be in quotation marks. But if it's numbers and symbols or numbers and letters, you have to surround it by quotation marks. Except for things that are a column name or a table name. Those don't have to be in quotation. But if you're doing your where clause or condition, where you're saying where state equals whatever, those would have to be in quotation marks. And guys, that's the last question on your assignment. Now, those of you that attended the live session, I will be sending you an email this evening with the help sheet that helps you follow along with your assignment and gives you the hints that you need to help complete it and reminders of what you're using. We'll also have a glossary that includes the sample syntax of each one of those type of SQL statements. Okay, guys, have a good evening. Have fun with this project, and I will see you guys tomorrow.